A cop slapped a judge in open court and thought he'd walk away. He had no idea who he just hit. Nobody walked into courtroom 3C, expecting history to be made. That afternoon, it was just past 4:30 p.m. At the Travis County Courthouse in Austin, Texas, and Judge Alana Merriweather was already an hour behind schedule. The courtroom was stiff with impatient attorneys checking watches aboard Beath, leaning against the back wall, the defendant twisting a tissue between her fingers at the defense table, and then through the double doors came Officer Rick Holstead. He moved like someone who thought the floor belonged to him, stocky-build uniform still dusty from his shift. Jaw set like he'd been grinding his teeth since lunch. People noticed him. How could they not? He always made sure they did. He didn't just walk into rooms, he entered them like a man doing everyone else the favor of showing up. Judge Merriweather looked up from her notes the second he passed the bar. "Officer Halstead," she said, voice calm, low but firm, "please take the stand." He didn't nod, didn't smile, just stomped his way to the witness seat like he was late to something important. Truth was, this hearing wasn't even supposed to be a big deal, just a follow-up on an arrest he'd made 3 weeks earlier. Simple drug possession case. Nothing flashy, but something about the way Judge Merriweather was watching him told Rick this wasn't going to go the way he expected. She studied him with the kind of stillness that made grown men squirm. Early 50 seconds. Sharp eyes, short natural curls just barely peeking out from beneath the edge of a robe. She wasn't flashy either, but there was something commanding about her presence. Something that made people sit up straighter. When she spoke, the courtroom had quieted. Now everyone could feel it. Something brewing under the surface. District Attorney Baldwin leaned forward, flipping through a worn legal pad. "Officer Halstead," he began, "can you walk the court through the events of the evening of February 2nd? Halstead sat back in the chair, arms crossed. "Sure," responded to a call. Saw the suspect standing outside of her car approach. Identified myself. She was nervous. Said she was waiting for her brother. I asked to search the vehicle. She resisted at first, so I detained her. Found 3 gr of meth under the seat. Was she violent during this encounter? No, he said flatly. Did she give you verbal consent to search her vehicle? She was evasive. Didn't he say no? Judge Merriweather raised her hand slightly. Officer Halstead, that wasn't the question. Did she give you verbal consent? Halstead stared at her. She didn't, not give it a beat of silence. "Let's be clear," she said, eyes locked on his. "You detained. A woman searched her vehicle and arrested her without verbal consent, without a warrant, and with no visible contraband in plain sight. Is that correct?" Rick Halstead's nostrils flared. "I followed my training." "Then your training is flawed," she replied. But Letton continued. You could feel the shift in the room. The air got heavier. Halstead sat up straighter. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the seat. Baldwin cleared his throat. "Officer, your body cam footage was submitted into evidence, but the first 4 minutes are missing." "I had technical issues," he muttered. "Convenient," Judge Merriweather said under her breath, but loud enough. Halstead looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped. "It means this court takes gaps in police footage very seriously, especially when that gap happens to cover the entire interaction before a citizen was detained." "You're out of line," Judge Halstead said, leaning forward in witness box. "You're accusing me of lying in front of the whole courtroom." She didn't blink. "No, Officer Halstead. I'm giving you a chance to tell the truth before someone else does it for you." His fists clenched in his lap. A few people in the gallery exchanged glances. This wasn't just another routine hearing anymore. The whole mood had shifted into something sharper, tenser. Halstead's breathing had quickened, his ears burned red, and for the first time since stepping into that courtroom, he wasn't in control. But what happened next would flip the entire courtroom and the entire city upside down. He stood up just like that, without permission, without a word. Rick Halstead rose from the witness stand like a man done playing by the rules. His chair screeched back on the polished tile floor, slicing through the silence. Judge Merriweather didn't move. "Officer Halstead," she said, her tone as even as ever. Sit down. He didn't. Instead, he took a slow step forward, one foot in front of the other, the kind of steps that say, I dare you to stop me. The bailiff, young guy fresh out of training, shifted from the wall but hesitated. Holstead had that effect on people, he knew it. That uniform, that voice, the glare, it had worked for years. Nobody ever called his bluff. Judge Merriweather stayed seated. No panic. Just her eyes locked on him like a sniper sighting her target. I don't appreciate being accused in my own courtroom, Holstead said, voice booming. Now his chest puffed like a man backed into a corner. You're not being accused, she replied. You're being held accountable. That's something very different. He took another step. Do you know how long I've worn this badge? He barked. She leaned back slightly in her chair. Too long. Apparently. And then it happened. He slapped her. His open palm cracked across her face like a gunshot. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, calculated, fast. The room froze. The BFF stood, paralyzed. The attorneys gasped. The defendant at the defense table dropped her tissue. Even the court reporters stopped typing. Judge Alana Merriweather didn't fall. She didn't cry, didn't yell. Instead, she sat back in her chair, the echo of a strike still hanging in the air, a thin line of blood forming at the edge of her mouth. The courtroom was a vacuum. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned her head and looked straight at Holstead, who was breathing heavy now, his body finally registering what his rage had just done. Thank you, she said. Voice steady as stone. You just exposed everything. I've been fighting to prove silence again. But this time, it was the kind that comes before. A storm. The Baith finally snapped out of it. Hands behind your back. Now, he shouted, moving forward. Holstead stood stunned, like the reality of it hadn't fully hit him. I'm a cop, he yelled. You don't arrest a cop in a courtroom. But the cuffs clicked anyway. And that sound was the crack in the wall that had protected him for years. Merriweather dabbed the corner of her lip with a tissue still calm. You don't get to hide behind your badge anymore. Reporters were already outside. Words spread before the court could even be cleared. A clerk had texted her sister someone in the gallery posted on social media within 15 minutes. 3 local journalists were outside with cameras by dinner time. A shaky phone video had already made it to the front page of Twitter. That video showed everything: the disrespect, the power trip, and the slap. But what it didn't show was what came next, when the justice system had to answer for years. Years of pretending this sort of thing didn't happen. But this wasn't just about one slap. It was about all the times there wasn't a camera, and all the people who never got to speak back. The courtroom emptied fast. Holstead had to be walked out with 2 deputies on either side of him, shouting about protocol and respect the entire way. He was trying to make it sound like this was just some misunderstanding, but his face, tight, pale, sweating, said he knew better. Judge Merriweather remained seated for a moment, longer, tissue still pressed to her lip, blood staining the edge. She didn't want pity. She didn't want gasps. What she wanted was for someone to finally see. She stood, adjusted her robe, and stepped away from the bench without a single word in the hallway. It was chaos. News vans were pulling up already. Reporters were scrambling, live feeds firing up with headlines. They hadn't even had time to verify, but the footage recorded from 3 different angles, thanks to a defense attorney, a gallery witness, and a random college student interning for extra credit, didn't need words. It was clear a uniformed officer had slapped a sitting judge in open court, and that judge was a black woman. No one had to explain the weight of that. Within 4 minutes, the story was online. Local officer assaults judge in courtroom outburst. Regional Austin cop attacks judge over routine questioning. National the power race, and a badge caught on camera. It wasn't even just the act. It was everything around it: the arrogance, the entitlement, the years that led to this moment, layered into the video, plain as day. And just like Holstead's career, the one he built on fierce silence and knowing the system would always take his word, began to unravel at the Austin Police Department. His name was being scrubbed from the patrol roster. Within the hour, Internal Affairs went into overdrive, releasing a formal suspension notice by sundown. But Judge Merriweather, she stayed quiet. She went home to her modest house on the east side, walked inside, washed the blood off her face, and sat down with a pen and a yellow legal pad. No press statement, no interview, just plans, names, questions, quiet thoughts, with loud consequences. See, what most people didn't know was that she'd been documenting complaints like this for years. Not just Holstead, others, men like him. She had boxes of notes files full of dismissed cases, young men and women, whose voices had been buried under police reports, twisted into something they couldn't fight. Some had been falsely accused. Some had simply resisted, and some never made it out alive. She had tried the proper channels, filed memos, requested reviews, all denied. But now the country had just watched one of their best strike. A judge in broad daylight in front of attorneys, a baith, a court reporter, and a video camera. They couldn't unsee that. So Judge Merriweather made a decision that night, not for revenge, but for accountability. She wrote a list, names, badge numbers, dates, patterns, and at the top of the list, underlined 3 times, was Rick Halstead. He wasn't the only one, just the one who thought he could slap justice in the face and walk out untouched. But the truth has teeth, and it had just bitten back by sunrise. Halstead's name was trending on every major platform, not in the way he was used to, the kind where fellow officers slapped his back and said good job after a tough arrest. This time it was different. His face was plastered across thumbnails, newscasts, and headlines. But worse than that, people were digging, and they were finding everything. A reporter from the Austin Ledger, a local paper known for getting under the skin of City Hall, started connecting dots. Old complaints, lawsuits, settled quietly, arrests with missing footage, victims who'd gone silent after their stories didn't match what was in the final report. One name stuck out: Eli Dorsey, a 17-year-old picked up last summer for suspicious behavior while waiting for a rideshare outside a convenience store. No drugs, no weapon, just a black teenager with a hoodie and earbuds. Holstead claimed he matched a suspect description. Eli spent the weekend in juvie, charges dropped, case closed, but now with new eyes on the pattern. That case and a dozen more weren't closed anymore. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Judge Merriweather moved quietly, but with purpose. She didn't run to the cameras. She ran straight to the chief judge's office with a stack of files under her arm. She requested immediate reviews on 15 prior cases, all involving Holstead. The chief judge, an older white man who'd played it safe for most of his career, looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. "Alana," he said, trying to keep it calm, "do you really want to open this door?" She looked him dead in the eye. "The door's already off the hinges." Henry, outside, protests had started forming. Nothing explosive, not yet. But people were showing up with signs. Former defendants, civil rights organizers, teachers, parents. People who'd lost trust in the system long ago, but now had something they hadn't had in years: proof, footage of power being misused, and not just in some back alley or during a traffic stop. In a courtroom, the one place people thought justice still mattered. A civil rights attorney named Trina Lockett, who'd been fighting Halstead's coincidences for years, finally got the break she needed. She filed a motion to reopen 5 suppressed cases. That same day, the district attorney's office quietly dropped all charges in 3 pending cases tied to Holstead's reports. No press release, just cold panic behind closed doors at the police department. Morale was crumbling. Officers who had once defended Holstead were suddenly distancing themselves. Statements like "he's not who we are," and "he made a mistake," floated around like excuses in a sinking ship. But Judge Merriweather wasn't interested in their damage control. She was busy meeting with community leaders, legal advocates, and investigators. She didn't want headlines. She wanted change, and she was finally in a position to demand it. Every time a door opened, now someone had a question. Every hallway in that courthouse echoed with rumors. And the man at the center of it all, Holstead, was under house arrest, hiding in a gated suburb just outside of Pfluger, pacing his living room and yelling at a lawyer who couldn't spin this into anything except what it was: assault on a judge on camera. He kept saying the same thing over and over again. She pushed me, but nobody was buying it. Not anymore, because the public wasn't just watching, they were remembering and everything. that used to get swept under the rug was being dragged into the light, one dirty case at a time. By the end of the week, Judge Mayweather's chambers looked more like a war room. Workspace, stacks of old files were spread across every surface. Her legal clerk, Donovan Reese, was running on 3 hours of sleep and bad coffee, referencing past police reports. With recently leaked disciplinary records, what they were building wasn't a case against Holstead. It was an autopsy of a system that had let him thrive. "Look at this," Donovan said, holding up an internal complaint form from 2019. 3 officers reported Holstead for excessive force. All 3 were reassigned. Within a month, Merriweather took the paper, skimmed it, and dropped it in the growing folder, labeled retaliation. The more they uncovered, the more impossible it became to pretend this was just about one man. Meanwhile, public pressure was hit a boiling point. People weren't waiting for the courts anymore. They were demanding answers in the streets outside City Hall. Crowds had doubled every day. Local organizers turned parking lots into outdoor town halls. Teachers, nurses, bus drivers, veterans, people from every neighborhood were stepping forward to say what they'd held in for years. We knew we were scared. We didn't think it mattered, but now it did. And inside the courthouse, Merriweather wasn't just listening. She was documenting every testimony, every name, every missed warning sign. She requested a judicial audit of all arrest cases involving Holstead over the last 2 years, something no judge in the district had dared do before. It shook the system like a thunderclap. The police union fired back hard. A spokesperson accused Merriweather of waging a personal vendetta, called the investigation politically motivated, and claimed Holstead was the victim of a hostile anti-police environment. But their words fell flat. Because by then another story had dropped. A journalist from KXAN, Austin, had interviewed a woman named Monique Parr, who'd been arrested by Holstead in 2021 for public intoxication. She was sober, but she was also mouthy. Holstead slammed her head into the back of his cruiser and left her with a fractured jaw. The case was dismissed. No footage was ever released until now. Someone leaked the dash cam. It was grainy, but clear enough to shove her scream. The silence after that night. Monique's name trended beside Judge Merriweather's. The 2 women had never met, but now they were part of the same storm in Holstead. He was spiraling. Video from a neighbor's Ring camera showed him pacing on his porch at 2 a.m. shirtless on the phone, ranting. The clip went viral. Some people laughed. Others saw what it really was. A man who'd spent years drunk on power, now choking on the consequences. Back at the courthouse, Merriweather called a closed-door meeting with district judges. She laid out everything. Patterns of abuse, silenced reports, systemic cover-ups. She didn't ask for permission. She gave them a choice: either we clean this up now, she said, looking each one of them in the eye, or we answer to it later on someone else's terms. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And for the first time in a long time, someone in power had said those words out loud. The system hadn't just failed the people, it had failed itself. And now the match had been lit from inside the very courtroom where silence used to reign 2 weeks after the slap. Holstead sat inside a courtroom again, but this time on the other side of the bench. No badge, no uniform, just a wrinkled gray suit and a twitch in his jaw. He couldn't stop. His lawyer whispered in his ear, but he didn't hear a word. All he could see was her judge. Alana Merriweather sat at the front of the courtroom, not presiding but observing. She had requested to be present, not to speak, not to sway, just to witness what justice looked like. When it didn't flinch, the prosecutor laid out the charges with surgical precision: aggravated assault on a public official, abuse of power, tampering with official police documentation, pattern of misconduct over 6 years. Halstead's defense was weak emotional stress, career fatigue, decades of public service. The courtroom barely blinked. The jury didn't need long. Guilty on all counts as the sentence was read. Holstead stared at the floor like it owed him something. He never looked up, not even when he passed Merriweather on his way out in cuffs. But she watched him, not with anger, not with revenge, with resolve. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited again. Reporters shoved mics into face, but Merriweather kept walking at the bottom of the courthouse steps. A group of young students stood holding handmade signs. One read, "Protect us, Like you protect your own. Another justice doesn't wear a uniform. Merriweather stopped and looked at them. This isn't the end. She said it's the start of something better if we want different outcomes. We have to demand different systems. That clip went viral too. But this one hit differently, because it wasn't about a slap anymore. It was about everything behind it. Every ignored complaint, every buried case, every young life that had been steamrolled in the name of order. Within a month, the department rolled out a full internal review. Body cam gaps were flagged. Automatically anonymous complaint systems were funded and open to the public. A new oversight board civilian run was created with subpoena power and Judge Merriweather. She didn't gloat, she went back to work. She kept pressing, kept watching, kept listening. Because real change doesn't come with fanfare or viral clips. It comes when people stop pretending, when silence breaks. When someone stands up and says, "This ends here." Life doesn't always teach with kindness sometimes. It teaches with consequences. What Rick Halstead did was brutal. But what it revealed was bigger than him. If you see something wrong, say something. If the system won't listen, be the one who makes it. Because power without accountability isn't strength. It's just a ticking clock.